claim to be honest. We simply are claiming that we are moving in that direction somehow. Tonight, our topic is freedom, and I want to nuance what
Is that our only topic?
I think so.
Okay.
But I'm going to sit back and listen and hope that you guys can put together a good show. But I would like to make a point, if we'll bring the Google Hangouts in. I want to give my definition of freedom. And so here is how I'm going to do it. I'm simply going to take the word freedom, and if you can imagine this in your mind's eye, putting a horizontal line and then putting freedom up underneath it. And it's just like saying, well, I have an object that is a tree, and then I have a line underneath the tree, and then I have the word TREE underneath the line. So what I'm doing, I'm simply drawing a horizontal line, putting freedom up underneath the line, and this is what I'm going to put on top of the line. Christopher Mowdy, would you play? Now that I have defined freedom, welcome to the Hangouts. You guys go for it.
Before we begin, make sure that we're not sending Skype back to them, or make sure we're not sending their sound back to them, please. Crew, all right, very good. Greg, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful.
I missed fighting with you and making you feel bad about yourself Sunday on Clash Course.
I'm sorry, you must have slept too deeply to dream then.
Oh, really? You dreamed about me?
I mean, that's the only place where you ever win in those ones. So.
Nice one. All right, we're talking about freedom tonight, and apparently we need to speak completely in music. Greg, why don't you start us off and give us your thoughts on the topic?
So let me, I guess,
in music, please.
In
music, please.
Yeah, a good one. This is music.
Oh, okay.
Hey, if you can define God the way you do. The thing that really made me want to talk about freedom today was I have been embroiled in a very, very long-running debate with one of my best friends who is staunchly libertarian in his philosophy. And I really respect a lot of you as far as your intellect and your opinions go. And I wanted to bounce the idea of what freedom is off of you, because I think that what I've recognized in that discussion and in many of the discussions that I've had with other similarly minded people is that I think that we simply understand the terminology different. So I thought, one, that nuances well with many of the other things that the New Covenant Group focuses on, but I personally look at freedom as a metric that can only be measured at the cultural level. For one, there's individual freedom is somewhat irrelevant. There is such a thing as individual freedom, but I think it only becomes relevant in any sort of policy decision, at least at the cultural level. And it is something that is not an independent variable. We cannot directly manipulate freedom. Say, well, here, you are now free. You are more free than you were before. All we can do is modify the environment and see what happens. I think that there's a way that we can measure freedom, but there's not a way that we can directly control it.
You know, I'd like to suggest that freedom can mean many things, and there are many kinds of freedoms. I can define freedom as I do anything that I want to do, no matter how it affects you. I think a good question to ask in this discussion, rather than what is freedom, is what kind of freedom should we be practicing?
Well, my wife and I had a really interesting discussion earlier today about this topic. And we were talking about freedom in general instead of talking about specific kinds of freedom, because I think that if you talk about freedom in general, you cover more ground. because when you nail yourself down to a specific kind of freedom, it kind of takes the conversation in too specific a direction, I guess. So so we were talking about freedom in general, and we came up with two scenarios, one in which that resonates with us, and one that we don't think could possibly exist. And the one that couldn't possibly exist from our perspective that we came up with was total utter freedom. Because in total utter freedom, everything's up for grabs. There is no right, there is no wrong, and it encompasses right and wrong, hence making them useless, and none of those things matter, right?
Wait.
Go ahead.
If you're defining freedom along the lines of freedom to do to somebody else what you would not have done to you, then that's not freedom. That's imposing your will upon somebody else.
But that is total freedom.
And this is where I said that I think it's only relevant on the cultural level. Individual freedom could certainly be measured as the freedom to do what thou willst, if you will, and that means absolutely anything that your heart desires you can do, or that any part of you desires, I guess.
In this sense, freedom is not a valuable thing necessarily. It's just. So we're not talking about something I'd recommend. It's certainly not the kind of freedom I would want people to have.
No. So to your point, hold on one second. To your point, what I asked my wife when we were talking about this scenario was, how much do you think empathy goes to constrain freedom? Right? And she didn't think that really had much to do with anything, but it sounds like exactly what you guys are talking about. So I'll pose that question to you. How much do you think empathy has to do with constraining people's freedoms in the extreme sense?
Nothing, because if you're empathizing, it changes what you want to do, and you're free to then do that in that extreme sense.
That's not a constraint?
Not if it. I mean, for example, if I'm going to be this willy-nilly, almost sociopathic person, and I'm walking down the street and I feel like knocking you over just because I bump into you, and then I see you're hurting and I feel like bad for you and I want to help you up. Well, that might change my direction, but I'll do that too because I want to. The empathy might just change my agenda. In that extreme sense, extreme freedom sounds to me like a very dangerous thing.
Just stopping for a moment
agree.
to let you guys know that if you see on the screen that you've been muted, it's because we're hearing audio back from you and there's a bad echo. So please don't be offended. If you speak and we can't hear you, we will let you know. But you can also unmute yourself.
So I wanted to follow up with the two different kinds of freedoms that my wife and I were talking about real quick, and then anyone else can jump in on this. And then we talked about the boundless freedom, which we can argue about, and then we talked about a limited kind of freedom, and that was the kind that resonated with us. And the way that I would like to talk about that is like bounded levels of nested constraints, because I like that definition because it works context specifically. So, for instance, when I'm hanging out with my family, there is one constraint level is my birth order. I'm the youngest in the family, so that constrains certain freedoms I have in the way that I behave. Another constraint would be the location in which we're hanging out. When I'm in my parents' house, I behave a certain way. When I'm at a restaurant with my family, my freedoms to behave are different. And then the occasion, of course. So there are these levels of constraints of freedom based on all these different levels, and those are just levels of constraint when I'm hanging with my family. When I'm hanging with my wife and not with my family, there are completely different levels of constraints of my freedom. Now, I just put that out there for everybody.
When you say constraints, and perhaps I'm not taking your meaning the same way you're meaning it. If it's a constraint, you're talking about it dynamically affects the boundaries of that freedom, but it doesn't necessarily make you no longer free. Because from my standpoint, I think we can either have a victim mentality or a mentality of choice. And I can realize that in certain circumstances, certain choices are not going to really work out well. And in other circumstances, those choices might work out better. But I don't want to feel like, well, I can't behave this way now because I'm with my family. But rather, I think it'd be better for me to be thinking in terms of, you know, I'm with my family and behaving this way isn't going to work out well. So that's what I'm going to choose to do. This alters the sense that I'm having towards the freedom. Am I a victim or am I a decider? You know.
Yeah, it's a willing participant.
Bob, it sounds like
I see that happening at one level, but at another level, I see, you know, like being in certain situations changes your behavior on a non-choice level. You know, I can't change the fact that I'm the youngest in my family, and that changes my behavior when I'm with my family, whether I like it or not.
It doesn't have to change your behavior, though. I mean, it changes, you know, ways that you may be treated, but it doesn't necessarily.
Decades of psychologists would disagree with you.
Yeah. Officer, why did you pull me over? And then he pulls out his gun. It's going to change my behavior.
Bob, it sounds like you're saying that as long as we are able to do what we want to do, we are free, and the constraints that Christopher is talking about, you're viewing as parameters that change what we want to do.
They change the options that we have for consideration. They change the likely outcomes that could result from certain choices I might make.
But are you telling me that you have never been in a public place and had your belly button itch and wish that you could scratch it?
I just scratch it. I guess I'm.
I was going to say, that stops people.
Yeah. Belly
buttons itch.
Don't bypass that point because that is that is a moment, and there are plenty of moments like it when you want to do something, but you can't because of the environment that you're in.
Well, I don't think that. I think it's oversimplistic to say that I want to, but I can't. There's a part of me that wants to, but there's a part of me that also doesn't want to, or else I would. But what I'm saying is that I try to frame the situation so that I realize I have options. So let me be uncouth if I can be, let me be inappropriate if I can't be, or let me choose not to be, because given all the possible outcomes, I think I'd rather deal with these ones if I make this choice. And so I try to frame it in terms of a personal choice so that it doesn't leave me feeling as though I've been imprisoned by it.
But couldn't you agree that it could also be framed in the way that I'm framing it, such that, like, at the dinner table in my parents' house with my family, I can throw bread at my sister. At a Mother's Day brunch at a restaurant, I'm probably, even if I had that thought, am not so inclined to do so.
Yeah.
But that's the point where you cross a sort of like a social boundary. Okay, it's like these. Sorry, I'm hearing a massive echo of myself, and I've done everything I can to avoid that.
Skype will work it out. Just let it go.
I think we're in danger of trying to screw each other down into absolutes. I think there's a danger in absolutes. I think there are. Sorry, I'm still really hearing a massive.
Just take your headphones off for a moment while you're speaking, Jim.
No, that would freak me out even more. I understand what the points that both of you are making, but I think what we're ultimately trying to come to here is that sometimes things just need to be worked out on their own merits. I think if you try to come to absolutes about anything, you'll always come to an absolutely wrong conclusion. This idea that you should be free to do whatever you want, that's not what freedom means at all. And I'm getting an echo of
Where is
myself
that?
again.
Can you determine where that echo is coming from? You can also do that on your end.
I think it's just coming something from his end. I cannot find anybody feeding back the sound.
Generally, you can see somebody throwing levels back at you, and you can mute it. But
Chris, I think that it's entirely possible to coherently and completely adopt this view of freedom in the way that you're talking about it. I think it's also possible to coherently and completely adopt it the way that I'm talking about it. And I realize that, therefore, isn't freedom an illusion?
Well, it depends on how you frame it, I guess, is what it's coming down to. Couldn't freedom just as well be the kinds of choices that are available to you? And aren't those just
but what if
irrational
choices,
choices?
Them in light of what I would have rather have done.
What if they're not real choices?
They're not.
Oh, in some cases, they're absolutely not real choices. I mean, there's some places where there's just things you can't do and survive.
I have a question for everybody. When you watch the news and you hear about somebody doing something that you think is a bad choice, did they have the freedom to choose something else?
Well, now we're getting a little bit more into free will. I think the deterministic aspects are something that should probably just be avoided for
Gotcha.
the purposes of this discussion, because
Okay.
otherwise it's going to get way too.
You don't think that there's a
complicated.
severe overlap between freedom and free will?
Well,
Isn't that
that's
what we're
true, but
talking
I think that at least a lot of atheists and other people who are inclined to naturalism are going to be pretty well convinced that free will is in many ways an illusion. That
Certainly not all of them, because we might feel that nature itself has set many things in homeostatic balance, so that all of the options are really like a house of cards that could fall in any direction.
Right.
Well, and that's where I think that to speak to your point earlier, Christopher, about the family or the birth order being something, psychologists would beg to differ, that birth order doesn't change things, but I didn't mean that it's not within your power to act in a certain way. I'm not articulating this very well, but what I meant is anything that you are inclined to do, you can do. Any choice that you might want to do, you have that option to do. You may choose not to. Say it's throwing your bread at your sister in a nice restaurant. You may choose not to because you are weighing the consequences of that action. But I still view that as freedom. You are freely making that choice, and that it's a form of freedom, at least. Now the consequences, I think, of or the ones that are relevant when we're talking about freedom, specifically when I'm asking about manipulation of freedom, are things that are artificial consequences that are decided by other people, whether it's direct social control or government control or even physical control. For example, many people will look at a woman with an abusive spouse and say, why don't you just leave? And act as if that is just a choice that she can make, when the reality is she believes, whether true or not, that leaving could end her life or her children's lives, and that's not a choice that she's willing to make because there's an artificial level of control being placed upon her. Now, these natural controls that are entirely environment dependent are things that I think that's just life, that birth order affects the way that your personality will develop. But that's not, I don't think, a necessarily relevant question to freedom, because that just makes you who you are, and it's who you are that then creates the dynamic of choices.
So you bring up an interesting point, which my wife Donna and I also talked about, which is essentially applying structure negates freedom to some extent. For every ounce of structure you apply, you remove a little bit of freedom. Would most people agree with that?
Or you define the context in which options exist.
Yes. I mean,
Julie, I think you might have something to say on this one. You
I'm
mentioned
wondering if it could also be, if this is accurate, the closer you get to total freedom, and I think of, anarchy, I guess, in one sense, because you mentioned societal impacts, but isn't there this, I guess I have this sense that the closer you get to that, then you're free to do more in one sense, but yet it becomes a survival mode. And then how free are you really?
I would argue
What-
that
that is my opinion on that as well.
What you're saying,
measurement of freedom.
and I would agree with it, is that although there may seem to be certain options, can you act on those options and sustain the level of freedom that you have, or are there certain actions you can take, and that although you can take them, they will then result in further constraints being imposed? There's a sense
Christopher-
in which you are evaluating the outcomes and perhaps making your decision based on not what my options are presently, but what the likely outcomes are to do to change those constraints.
I also wonder, though, on the note of anarchy, if we talk about freedom as an individualistic concept, that's why I say it's only a relevant measure at the societal level. Because as an individual, you may actually have the freedom to do what thou wilt, especially if there was no governmental structure and say you were a multi-billionaire. You certainly have the power and the ability to do whatever you would like. I mean, we have that example here in the world today with plenty of dictators and tyrants that are, running totalitarian regimes and really without consequence.
But even at that level, there was a
So this is a wonderful intermission moment with this wonderful music
nice
playing.
ringtone.
To say, I'd like to make a quick comment, and then I want to turn it over to some of the people who haven't spoken. Christopher, you asked a question a moment ago, and there's been lots of discussion on it, but I wanted to address it as well because I thought it was interesting, and that is, does adding structure, when you add more structure, does that automatically mean less freedom? And I wanted to comment on that I don't think it necessarily means less freedom. It means different kinds of freedom. When there is no structure, as in a government in this world, lots of people are free to make very bad choices against me or anybody else, and that restricts my freedom. Their ability to impose bad choices upon me or other people. But when you add structure, you do take away those sorts of freedoms from all sorts of people, but that leaves opportunity for all kinds of different freedom, and that freedom is often to make better choices and choices that benefit yourself and benefit other people. A good structure can give us freedom for all of us to work well together, and I think societal freedom was brought up, and I just wanted to expand on that. But there have been a few people that haven't contributed, and you're here, so I'm going to put some pressure on you, and that is, let's start with Alex. Alex, what do you have to say?
You're rushing me.
I'm rushing.
I actually have a lot of thoughts, and I'm kind of sorting them out in my head.
All right, you get it sorted
You're
out.
Canadian, in this crazy socialist country, from at least the American perspective, you must have like a totalitarian government. And
Right, he's
no
Canadian.
freedom.
He doesn't understand freedom. Sorry. Daryl, what do you have to say about this?
Well, I guess I'm just mostly a spectator tonight. I haven't really thought of anything to contribute at this particular time.
All right. Well, we're going to come back to you. You give it some thought. Also, I forgot you are a Texan. You also don't understand freedom. Who else do we have here? There.
Too much freedom.
Esta. Yes. Esta. What do you have to say?
Dr. Jones asked for music, so I'm gonna give him that. How about the freedom to believe? Like a shepherd, I will feed you. I will gather you with care. I will lead you and hold you close to my heart. We will run and not grow weary, for our God will be our strength, and we will fly like the eagle. We will rise again. The freedom to believe is what keeps everybody going. Miscommunications, differences of opinion. Funny, I picked my t-shirt this evening. It says "Free to be me." And there's one place where we all get that personal freedom, and there's a real need for that. And that might say why there is a need for some people to believe.
Viktor Frankl came to a conclusion when he was in concentration camps, and that he certainly experienced a number of constraints on his freedom. But the thing that maintained meaning for him was the fact that he discovered that one thing they could never, ever, ever, ever take away from him was his freedom to choose how he was going to respond and perceive his circumstance. that he could make choices there. And oddly enough, he found that to be not only all the meaning he needed at that time, but something that gave him powerful meaning even later when he was free from the concentration camp. So there's a sense in which his freedom to internally couch his response and his perspective and his circumstance and make the choice was for him a very powerful experience of meaning, which I think therefore is associated for him in the illusion of freedom, or at least the relative experience of freedom. So that I guess I don't believe in freedom in the ultimate sense, other than free to do certain things, not free to do other things. So to me, it's a relative term.
Greg, can you take
I'd like
a moment?
to see Viktor Frankl and B.F. Skinner have a conversation.
Greg, can you take a moment and tell us a little bit about why you chose this topic? This was your suggestion, was it not?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic to me because I think that a lot of people, especially in American politics, look to, they invoke freedom. Freedom is constantly talked about as, this is, let's say, for example, even the current government shutdown is very much related to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that one of the primary hitching points that people want to get rid of with it is the mandate or the individual mandate that people must buy insurance. There's also the mandate, the contraception mandate that employers must provide contraception coverage with their insurance plans. And many people look at the former to be a restriction of their personal economic freedom to simply choose not to purchase insurance, and the latter to be a restriction of their religious freedom. And I have to consider either to be nonsense, that either of those arguments. That the first one, the choice to not purchase insurance, is not just a personal choice. And that's why I really don't think that any individualistic concept of freedom truly makes any sense when we consider that you're not living in a vacuum. The choices that you make don't affect just you. They affect everybody around you directly and indirectly. So any decision that we make to exercise our freedom personally can, at least, it doesn't necessarily, but it can have positive or negative effects of those around us. And that's where I look at freedom only at the societal level as being the relevant measure, because any policy decision, to bring back what Christopher had said about having structure reducing freedom, I think that this is it's more complicated than that. We need to do a little bit of calculus in this and figure out the maximum level of freedom that we can have with, where these curves intersect, and recognize that there is a point when too much structure starts to have a net negative effect on freedom, a net freedom deficit. But with not enough structure, we have the same thing, because there's, of course, individualism allows for predatory behavior and extortion or plenty of other things.
I'm on the other side of the pond over here in the United Kingdom, and I have to agree with what Greg just said there. At the moment, we're watching what's happening in the United States with the shutdown and everything, with a great deal of, I have to say, skepticism from both sides of the political spectrum. I mean, you guys have been presented with this choice. Getting back to this freedom word, choice, that invokes this notion that you have the freedom to choose from one side to the other. Sometimes there are just things that are right and things that are wrong. For example, our politicians will talk about freedom, and they'll use it in exactly the same disingenuous words that your politicians do. So you're being presented with this freedom of choice between evil Obamacare and the freedom of the markets. But in reality, I come from a country where we have free healthcare. If you're poorly, you go to the hospital, they make you well again, and you don't pay for it.
But don't you pay a tax towards that universal health care?
Yeah, yeah.
So
but
it's not
the
really
same
free.
tax, right? But the same tax is paid by people who are rich as is paid by people who are poor.
Right. So
It's-
how? So I, educate me as somebody who's not in the U.S. Educate me on this U.S. policy. Are we? Is it? How is it different?
There's one point I wanted to make before you answer that, is that the healthcare in the UK truly is free, to the extent that I went there to visit my sister-in-law who lived over there, and had I been injured when I was there or fallen ill, I would have had free healthcare, even though I'd never paid a dime in taxes toward that. It is freely provided.
Yeah, they have a real
Yeah.
problem with that over there. I mean, there are people outside of the
don't.
country who come to the UK just to get free health care, but all the
Yeah, but
citizens are required to pay.
that, again, that's a misnomer of the right-wing press. There are not huge influxes of people coming to this country seeking free healthcare.
It costs money to get there.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, they could go to just about any other country.
You can go to France, you can go to
economically
Germany, you can go
advanced
to any other European Union country and get exactly the same treatment. The difference with the United Kingdom is that we all pay a universal tax, so you can, if you, my tooth is starting to ache a little bit. Well, you don't have to look into your wallet to figure out whether or not you can afford to go to the dentist and get a treat or not. You just go to the dentist, okay? Now, we're talking about freedom. This is the topic of the conversation here. Do I want to be free to go to a doctor who will charge me $200, or do I want to be free to go to a doctor who won't charge me anything? That's not freedom of choice. This is an economic question. The notion of freedom has got nothing at all to do with what we mean by freedom. It's just a buzz phrase which is put out there by certain people with a vested interest. I'm free to be an American. Okay, land of the free, to do as you're told. What does freedom really mean? We need to drill down into what this word actually means, because it gets bandied around as if it's the difference between us and them, right? And there is no us and there is no them. There's human beings, and there are people who want to do us ill for whatever reason. And I'm sorry to highlight the elephant in the room, but the biggest reason is religious differences.
Amen to that.
Yeah, it can be. These people who are objecting to the mandatory health insurance, are they also objecting to the fact that you can, in most states, you'll have your license suspended or your registration suspended, or you'll be charged with a ticket and a violation if you're driving in your car and you don't have vehicle insurance?
I have a gripe on that. I was cited for not having proof of insurance. That is ridiculous. I had insurance.
You sound
Just
so
not
bitter.
having the card on me. Are you kidding me?
So it's actually a violation to not have proof of it.
Right, and they had changed that law. That was not the case until like 2009.
I think if you
I
show
got
it
that ticket,
later,
and I was
I think if you
angry.
show it later in a court of law, your fine will be lessened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
actually, it was
have
just
here-
dismissed, but it was still,
Yes.
I had to go to court
We-
to do it.
Here in New York, we have
Serves you
something
right.
they call it a fix-it ticket. You can get a ticket for some apparent violation, but if you can show that the violation didn't occur, or like, for example, if you have a bad taillight and you get it fixed, you just return the receipt with your pleading of not guilty, and the judge says, I'm not going to haul this person in here. It just goes away. So, but I mean, they're not complaining. My point, though, they're not complaining about that, are they? So-
I'll be the lone voice to speak to that.
Yeah, sure.
I think I may be the only one here that's not a big fan of the Healthcare Act. And my reason is I agree with Greg. We don't live in a vacuum. And I would be pleased if they had been more honest and actually passed a single payer system or something like that. The problem that I have with this is I look at it differently from my car insurance, because I live in Portland, Oregon, and I have a bike and I have a car and I have other choices, and it's a little bit different to compare the two because we're talking about your health, and I can walk to the store if I need to, so it's not like I don't have other choices.
What if you can't walk?
Well, actually, I'm a big fan of a lot of services that we have in this area, myself included, in participating in, services that help people that can't get around.
I
My problem with the Healthcare Act is this. I think, yes, I don't want to live in a vacuum, and I'm fine paying taxes, and if everybody would get it equally, I think I would have been fine with it. But it's not equal. There are a lot of people that are left in limbo, and I think this is just another example of, they shoot words back and forth between the two parties and being disingenuous.
I think it doesn't go far enough.
Neither one of them really wanted to solve
It doesn't
the
go far
problem.
enough.
Right.
What
And
I was saying.
this was a big bonus for insurance companies.
Yeah. It might be a step forward, but it's bad.
Yeah, I think that overall, Julie, you probably have more people who agree with you on that than,
Yes.
or either. I don't. Can we get a quick show of hands? Is there anybody who really strongly supports the Affordable Care Act in here?
Well, I support it as a step forward,
but
but I feel we need to get to a single payer system. We gotta end this nonsense. Yeah.
See, I actually would argue, and I'm sorry we're kind of going on a tangent here, but I would argue that it's a step backwards in that it's almost an appeasement policy that it's going to delay the inevitable single payer or healthcare that we will eventually have to have.
People would not accept that there'd be even more. Let me tell you, just if I could briefly, 3 stories. I've had 3 major illnesses in my lifetime. Each time that I had that major illness, I had insurance, and yet insurance would not pay it. The first time I became very ill at college, and I was forced to drop out. I was over the age of 18. I was forced to drop out of college. I came home. I went into the hospital. My father had a great job. He had great insurance. I was not covered by it because it was determined that I was over the age of 18 and not in college.
Yeah.
And my father was not at all the kind of person who was happy about him paying for it. The second time, I had a lung that collapsed, and I had insurance, but through my employer. But when the lung, I had to have part of my lung removed because it just continued, and it was determined that the cause of the lung collapsing was the fact that there were all of these cysts at the top of my lung. The insurance company decided those cysts were there from birth. It was a pre-existing condition, and I was not covered. That was $26,000 that I had to come up with and pay for this. I had insurance. The last time, I was working for an employer, and I was actually going through a time where some very real traumas were being relived from childhood, and I became amnestic. I became unable to work, and during that time, although I was trying to get help, because I was not working, I lost my health insurance, and I couldn't get the help that I needed. It took me a long time to get back up. So here's three that convinced me. If your health insurance is based upon the fact that you're working, if you get sick, you're out of luck. But if your wife gets sick, she's covered. But I'll tell you, there's 3 major illnesses. Now, I managed to pay for these things, but I'll tell you, huge bills for me, even though I had insurance.
That's my biggest problem with
it. It shouldn't be based upon the fact that you're working or not. It should be based upon whether you're sick and you need a doctor, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
The entire rest of the world is looking at the United States and scratching their heads and face palming.
Yes.
Every single day, right? Do you have sick people? Yes or no? Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Do they need to be looked at by a doctor? Yes, they do. So do it. All of this BS about whether or not you've got insurance is neither here nor there. Do sick people need a doctor? Yes or no? Right. So just do it. I understand that it's a political football, right? But it is so frustrating to turn the news on every single day. I'll watch CNN. I'll watch Fox. I even watch Fox, by the way. I'll watch the BBC. I'll watch all of the major news outlets, and all of them are of one voice. Why don't America just look after sick Americans? And then you turn on the American news outlets, and you're all just arguing with each other about which insurance company deserves to get richer than the other one.
Yeah.
Just pass the healthcare bill, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Do it.
You're
Look after each other.
I agree, Jim. Totally. Yeah.
You're right, Jim. The healthcare insurance
It's
is
a no-brainer.
causing the problem, in my opinion. We just had something happen in our hospital. We call it HCAPS, they send surveys out to the patients, and if a certain area is not performing well, then they reimburse the procedure at a lower amount. There are tiered payments for services provided, and the way they measure this is based on a patient's survey. And our department just got hit with $3 million because the patients that were put on new medications in the hospital were not said they were not counseled on them, and that they were not told of the side effects, which gave the insurance company the right to pay us $3 million less for this coming year. Now, we were not seeing the patients face to face, every single patient, not the pharmacist. It was nursing's responsibility. But it fell on us, and budget cuts because of the insurance company, and then even harder quality of care because we got cuts in our department. So now we have twice the workload, and that's going to bring down the performance of the department, and we have more work to do now because now we're assigned to give the information to the patients. So the insurance companies are causing the hospital's employees to lose their positions. They're causing benefits to be cut. They tell us to go home if there's not enough work for the number of people. Well, that hasn't happened in our department because we are not staffed. But a lot of the departments, the nurses are told, there's no work today, go home. And then they fall below a certain level, and then their benefits get cut too, because now but it's due to the insurance companies. The insurance companies are causing so many problems for everyone. I am in favor of parts of Obamacare, but I agree. We need another year. There's too much to work out. There's way too much to work out.
One of the problems, though, is that the major opposers of Obamacare, they're not opposed to it because it doesn't go far enough. They don't want it at all. And so, although my opposition to it would be that it doesn't go far enough, with these people who want to defund it, they don't want there to be any form of government health care or any. They want everybody to be on their own. Medicare
is a terrible idea, of course, as is Medicaid. Well, why would we fund that? Jan Brewer in Arizona has, at least as of last weekend, had simply cut off Medicaid. All the other states have been carrying that forward, and then they're going to get paid back by the federal government when the shutdown ends. But she just stopped it for everybody. That was
we have a viewer comment here. This is actually from my wife. Says, does Jim want to come over to America to talk to our politicians, please? We really enjoyed those comments.
Well, I have to say, I lived in California for a long time, and a very good friend of mine, while I was over there, had to go into hospital with like a really serious condition. I mean, she really needed some help. And I pushed her into the front door of the hospital, and it was a really great hospital. They had the latest technology and great doctors and everything. And the moment that she was pushed through the front door on the wheelchair, even though she could walk, she had a barcode put around her wrist, and every single time that anybody who provided any sort of care at all, I mean, literally down to nurses that would administer paracetamol for a headache, they scanned the barcode.
Yeah.
And she got a bill when she walked in there, and she was treated like a product. She wasn't treated like a human being who needed care. She was treated like a book on an Amazon conveyor belt. And it was just inhumane. It wasn't what you would expect from the United States of America, right? The United States brand around the world is billed as this, like, home of the brave, right? And the healthcare system is embarrassing you all.
Yes.
I'm sorry, right? But it just is. Go to Norway, go to Sweden, come to my country, the United Kingdom, go to any other country in the entire rest of the world and see what their healthcare system is like, and then look at your own and hang your head in shame.
Hang on just a moment.
I'd like to wrap this back around to freedom.
Hold on. Alex, have you got your thoughts together now? Have you?
No. The conversation just went.
Oh.
I actually had a couple questions I wanted to know because this is actually something that happened recently and today. In fact, I got kind of the full story, but I wanted to know what would happen if somebody, 27-year-old girl, diagnosed, comes in for stomach pains and has cancer. What would be how would it work in the States? She goes into hospital. What happens from there?
As soon as they have determined what her insurance is like, they will then come up with a set of course of action that will be able to, be provided based on what's likely to get paid back, and then that will be spun into the best decision.
And if she's poor, she'll die.
There's also fundraisers that will be set up by her friends and family. That they will contact charity organizations and places that will help pay for her I mean, the American system is not without people who have compassion, but the problem is there's simply not enough people to pay for all of the needs that we have that are doing it through these different
there are, just not
organizations. Right, that's what I mean. In the current system, we just don't have sufficient. Cancer and especially other very costly things to treat just rack up massive bills. And you see, basically, anytime you go to a convenience store around here or a bar or anything, there's a printed poster for some benefit that's going to come on for somebody who just had a stroke or who had or who was diagnosed with cancer or some other serious illness, and they are doing fundraisers, and then a local business will donate some things that they can raffle, and they try to raise money in any way that they can. But in the end, there's actually a show about this. You may be familiar. I hear it just at the end. Some people resort to selling or making drugs, even.
Why doesn't the cancer patient just treat herself with cannabis oil?
Some do.
Or why doesn't she use cinnamon and honey? I told her that today. I was actually, basically what happened is a friend of mine had stomach pains, and she went to hospital, and within a month she's been diagnosed. The tumor has been removed, and she's going to be starting chemotherapy. But I mean, it's just a precaution. She doesn't necessarily have had to have had a chemotherapy, but she's, more or less cancer-free now. And this is less than a month. And they're providing her the ability, the option to freeze her embryos. I mean, her and her fiance's embryos. And I was like, whoa, don't you have to pay for that? And they're like, no, cancer. They just do that. Just book the meeting the next day. And
there's the little girl from Pakistan, Malala Yousafzai. She was shot in the head by the Taliban for having the temerity to go to school.
I know.
Now, you might notice that she didn't get taken to any country. She got brought to the United Kingdom because her parents knew that her gunshot wound would be treated properly. And, she's campaigning for nothing less than the right of girls to go to school. I mean, it sounds like the ultimate no-brainer.
I saw that today.
And she's a wonderful, inspirational individual, and she's like 16 or whatever. And
Amazing.
Just look at interviews of this person on YouTube. She'll bring a tear to your eye. She doesn't want for nothing less than for children to be educated. Now,
I'm curious.
Wasn't the first thing she's going?
I'm curious, Julie, if you were, you said you were against Obamacare for this reason. Do you? And then I have no answer for this. I really don't know, because I think America is in some ways so obstinate we're not ready for this. But I don't know if getting rid of this Obamacare altogether will bring us closer to universal health care or farther away. But I really feel that universal health care is where we need to go. And if I could believe that getting rid of it would bring us closer to universal health care, I'd be all for getting rid of it.
Yeah. I don't know. I would be for that too, because the problem I see is the cost of health care. Because I don't want someone from the UK who's over here vacationing to go to the hospital and go home with a $35,000 bill because they had surgery over here. I mean, it's
I
ridiculous.
wonder how that works.
That's exactly how it works. Yes.
And insurance doesn't help because, like you said, in your own experience, if you get sick, you can't work, you lose your insurance.
Alex,
The other thing is bankruptcy rates in this country for people, that file for bankruptcy for medical reasons. A lot of them have insurance.
Oh, yes.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, our insurance has maximum lifetime payouts. That seems odd. It's we're just going to cap you at how much your life is worth, essentially.
Yeah.
Some of the best doctors that we have in our NHS in the UK are American.
This is one of the things that I wanted to bring this back to is freedom, because I think that a lot of people do talk about the topic of freedom as far as, well, they can't make me pay for health care. They can't make me buy insurance. It is against my freedom for you to tax me to pay for other people's health care. This is the common argument. It's let the free market decide. But people don't like to look at the negative side of that. It's a free choice, free will, free market.
Yeah, if that's true, then we need to stop.
That people are free to die.
But that argument is so foolish, because if that's true, then we need to stop taxing people and just let the roads go to hell.
Well, and that is something that trust me, they have a very, very elaborate system of explanations, and they make fun of people who bring up the roads every time. It's still a valid argument, but this is
I don't know. We pay taxes. Our roads are still crappy.
Right. That's this is anarcho-capitalists.
Exactly.
Have a very elaborate philosophy on this, but what they neglect to recognize is their philosophy. It very explicitly just condones or at least turns a blind eye to the fact that people who can't afford health care or can't for any reason get it have only charity to depend upon. Otherwise, they simply die. And that is something that I look at it as a social level of freedom. Again, the freedom at the societal level is if somebody is forced to sell everything that they own, to give up everything they've ever worked for because they randomly got cancer, and their children suffer, their families suffer, and eventually they still die because they ran out of money. That's not freedom for those people.
Greg.
That's not freedom for the society at all.
Yeah.
Greg, I had a car accident, and I had a micro brain bleed, and with short-term memory loss, it took about 6 months recovery. Get this, my short-term disability payment from the state of New Jersey just barely covered my full insurance premium because I was not working. I had to pay the premium. It was for the family. It was $1,800 a month, and my short-term disability just barely covered it. Like, there was nothing to live on.
That's immoral.
Well, they changed it. I don't think they changed it because I complained, but it was like a year later they changed it, and now they improved it. It only costs like $300 or $400.
That's exactly how I lost my insurance, because you could have kept your health insurance, but you just had to go through what they call COBRA.
Yeah.
I would have had to pay the full premium that the employer was paying, and I could have kept my insurance.
That wasn't even the full.
Sorry, Cobra.
It wasn't even the full payment. It was
Cobra.
It was less than the full payment because I had to pay for the whole family. There's 4 of us, but it's terrible. This insurance issue is a big issue, and free market. I don't really know much about macro or microeconomics, but I don't think it's so free anymore. It's all corruption, and it's all got laws and restrictions, and where you can manufacture, and who gets taxed and who doesn't get taxed. It's all for the big businesses. It's a farce. We don't live in a free market. I don't see it that way, but then again, I don't have much of a knowledge base.
After that lung surgery, I couldn't own a car for close to 5 or 6 years because I just couldn't afford to pay for the cost of my surgery and own a car at the same time. I couldn't do it. so I didn't have one.
Can I ask a really contentious question at this point?
Sure.
What do you think Jesus would make of the American healthcare system?
First, we must
I think
establish
Jesus
that
would
he
just
was
make everybody healthy.
an actual
Apparently,
historical.
he didn't exist. There's this
figure.
article coming out, and
Right. He's some sort of conspiracy.
Assuming that the alleged Christ actually existed, what do you think he would make of a system that assigns entire sections of society onto the scrap heap because they can't afford to be well?
I'd like to comment on
Is
that.
this Republican Jesus
Good.
or Democrat Jesus?
Hold on, we
This
have
is Republican
we have a
Jesus.
rare moment here, gentlemen. This is a rare
Yeah, I
moment.
did caveat that question with the idea that it might be contentious, but surely what we're talking about here is, we want our fellow human beings to live as long as they can because, hey, it's great to be alive, right? What would the alleged Christ make of this notion that you're only allowed to be well if you can afford it?
Daryl, let's turn that question over to you.
I was reading the one who could be considered possibly Jesus' greatest fan, his biggest follower, however you want to put it. I was reading one of his letters earlier this evening, and he was talking about freedom. And he was actually, in my estimation, he was doing everything he could to free the people he was talking to from religion, from their critical...
Joel Osteen?
No, his name was Paul. Unfortunately, I don't know his last name, so I have to refer to him as the apostle, and that makes it sound religious. But I believe he was just a man that had a great idea, because the freedom that he spoke of was freedom actually to love, just to love. And he said something along these lines. He said, the whole law is summed up in this: love your neighbor as yourself. And what I'm even hearing in this conversation tonight is people that are contending for actually doing that very thing, caring for one another, because this is a basic human need, obviously. This is one of the most basic. And I hear a group of people that seem to all agree that this is something that it's the heart of the matter. This is where, that we need to have something provided, something in place where no one has to go without. And I'm in full agreement with that. And I'll go out on a limb here and say I think Jesus would be too. So to answer your question, Jim, I would say he wouldn't make much of the American healthcare system.
Daryl, that was a great comment. By the way, you may want to see a doctor yourself because it looks like you've got an earbud jammed way up in your ear.
Well, I'm trying to adjust these things. I haven't figured out the volume control. I'm trying to turn them where it's not so loud.
Then you have something, Daryl. I think that is absolutely wonderful. What does it mean to love your neighbor, and what does it mean to love? And then we have restrictions by society, so it takes away our freedom to love. There's rules.
But your neighbors are, to a greater extent, atheist, right? So if you're going to love your neighbors, then you need to love people who do not believe in the same things as you, right?
Exactly.
By far and away, the largest minority group in American politics are non-religious atheist agnostics, larger than Jewish lobby, larger than Black Americans. You need to recognize that this isn't about what you believe; it's how you behave.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I believe in love, and I have no need for anybody to believe in my particular or specific beliefs, but I do have a need for them to let me love them. It's
right,
difficult.
But there are some incredibly rich and powerful people who own really big media news organizations who want you to hate people like me.
Why?
Jim,
because
If we knew the answer to that.
richer than they are already. You know?
It's horrible. I think that we really do need to address this more about loving your neighbor. We really do. I'm trying, how much most people don't even bother to love, and then someone wants to love so bad because love heals.
Yes, it does.
Your blood pressure goes down. There's no anxiety. It's a basic human need to be loved and to be accepted. I need it. I also want to give it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost out of time. I'm going to do what Dr. Jones does and make a round of closing comments. I really would like to go to a question go to a question that Esta Ann implied here and just go around and see if we can comment on this. Should I say the American government or government in general? Let's say the American government. Does the American government inhibit our freedom to love one another? Why don't we go to Daryl first?
Oh, wow. Why me first? I would have to say that it does, just by its the way it's structured and what it has become more than that. Because now when Jim referred to himself as the media wanting and encouraging people to hate him, I'm not sure just why, and I don't really care. Because I don't think there's any room for that. But we have a structure here that actually, I'll just put it in simple terms, keep it short. This is kind of my take on it. It encourages self-promotion. It's all about moving yourself forward, and if it takes running over somebody else or to hell with everybody else, that seems to be what it promotes. And I think more than anything else, we need to get away from that kind of thinking, that kind of government.
Alex.
Yes. Okay, so the question was,
does our American government inhibit us from loving one another?
I'm going to say yes, because of something that Gregory said earlier. The fact that you'll have to pay up the first thing they look at when you come in with cancer is, what your insurance is. And then there's people who are, by themselves, raising charities and outside of, let's say, a government situation. I think that they are, I think the government is, well, maybe not preventing, but there is a clear distinction between both of those. I think people are still capable. Actually, I take back what I said. Yeah, people are still capable of love. The government is not giving that message, but people are still, in some cases, doing that and able to do that.
Bob.
In some ways, I think it depends on how you look at it. I think the government is an obstacle, but in many ways, I entertain the notion that we, the people, have sat back passively to allow our just representatives to kind of make a lot of these decisions, and we don't allow ourselves to be aware of the decisions they make. And, so I think that there's a sense in which government is a huge obstacle to that, but we've kind of sat back and let that happen. For example, the kind of corporatist lobby, to me, I thought we were supposed to be a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Corporations don't get a voice in that, and they don't even need a voice. They don't need it because every corporation is owned by a person and worked at by persons, and by people just representing ourselves as people, all those needs can find their balance in that. So, we're basically a corporate own, we're the kind of like the flip side of fascism. But I think that's a huge problem. But I do think that we still have a constitution that supposedly should give us that opportunity to say, hey, let's change this. We can change this, and I think we should.
Julie.
I would say yes, because I think the way our government is just, I don't even know that I appreciate the structure of it anymore. It's politics, and it creates division. And instead of talking about real solutions, you get our team versus this other team mentality. And we, the people, seem to almost enjoy playing along, and we pick our side instead of looking at the real issues. It's, well, my guy's in office, so even though I hated when your guy was office because he was blowing up people in foreign countries, but now all of a sudden my guy's doing it, I'm not going to complain about it. And I think this dynamic goes on, and instead of solving real issues that need to be solved, like healthcare, and the list could go on of what's wrong in our country, but it's just all about division and picking a team, and it's a showcase. And I think that's what's going on right now from both sides, and our government shutting down. It's a showcase, and the American people, a lot of them, not all, kind of buy into the show that's being put on for us, and we don't get anywhere.
Is Christopher still with us?
It's kind of hard to love when it's just all about division and politics.
Absolutely.
Christopher.
And a lot of people
sorry.
that really deserve to be cared for and loved and need basic things, access to basic things to even feel like they have choices, get washed aside.
Thank you, Julie. Christopher.
Well, I'm a progressive and I'm an optimist. So I like seeing things progress, and I have optimistic faith in the Constitution being a malleable enough document to keep up with the arc of history bending towards civil and human rights. And even though it moves slower than cultural trends, I do not think that government itself gets in the way of freedom to love. I think that certain cultural trends might, like right now, the way that politics are, which is very divisive, is pretty much a recent cultural trend. Politics can bring together people of very diverse opinions. Whether they choose to love and hate each other, that's their individual choice. I don't think that the government itself and the way it's structured is responsible for the constraints on freedom to love each other. And I guess that's my answer to that question.
Esta.
Well, I really don't think that it's any worse than it was in the past. I think we have a new phenomenon going on over the last decade, especially with the internet. So we feel a lot more of the anxiety. We have a lot more information. We're a lot more confused, which brings to people fear. Instead of asking questions, they jump to conclusions. They don't know what they're talking about half the time, and then all this information goes out, and it's not anything to be afraid of. We need to get the facts. We need to communicate. I believe, like Christopher believes, I think this nervousness is more illusional than actual, and I think we do have time. I don't really think that this Obamacare is good. I think we're going to get some kind of a closure within the next week, because the cap there's a decision next week on the I don't even know what they call it, the interest rate cap or whatever, the debt ceiling. I'm sorry, the debt ceiling. So with that being said, take that all away and go back to love. The government, does it affect our ability to love? It does not have the take. It has no power over my heart. And I come from a bottom level up. I don't need to love the entire country down. I can't really make that much change. Who really listens to me except you people in the hangout? Right. Seriously, if I love Daryl, it builds him up from the bottom up, and he feels that love in his heart, and then it spreads that way, and I'm trying to love the neighbor, if they'll let me. So that's my opinion. Nah, it ain't taking the love away. It's not taking the love out of my heart.
Jim, I heard some Dougie noises and some groaning from you earlier. Do you have any closing comments to make?
I couldn't agree more with Bob and Julie and the previous speaker too. Like, I love all of you people. Of course I do, because you're my fellow human beings. We didn't have these tools 10 years ago, 5 years ago, to just speak to one another, yeah? And
Right.
just share views. It seems to me like the more the barriers come down, the less relevance government has. Okay.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, government said, "We're going to do this for you because it's the consensus." And maybe it worked. Okay. Wouldn't it be great if we got to a point where we didn't need governments? Wouldn't it be great if we just said, "Hey, we're all human beings on this planet, floating around, third stone from the sun." And maybe there's other sentient human beings on other planets out there, right? Now, I just can't help but worry that we get bogged down in these notions of who's right and who's wrong. We live on a stone, right? We're all made of DNA. Some of us accept the fact that we share a common ancestor with all of the other living organisms on the planet. Let's get over this idea that we need to win debates about the particular gods of the particular religions that we just so happen to believe in, and just get on with the business of looking after each other. I just want to love. I don't want to win. I want to live. And the fact that I do that under the umbrella of being a non-religious person shouldn't have any bearing whatsoever on my entitlement or otherwise to share an opinion. And so that's my 2 pence worth.
Very good.
Beautiful, Jim.
Hey! How come Jim always gets the clap and I didn't get any? Greg, do you have any?
That has to
choice?
do with a different part of healthcare.
I'm single, by the way,
Julie,
ladies.
there's a reason. There's a
With the
reason.
clock.
Greg, closing statement.
Well, I think that all of you have addressed Esta's question quite beautifully, and I don't know there's more I can add to it, so I won't. The closing I want to make is a little bit different here in saying that I think that there is 2 ways that we can look at freedom as individuals, and beyond saying individual or society level, there's also the negative understanding of freedom, meaning freedom from tyranny, freedom from oppression, freedom from laws or regulation, from rules or restrictions. But the flip side of that is the freedom of opportunity, the freedom to succeed, the freedom of, or the freedom of life, to be healthy, to have a good education, to the freedom of opportunity, to be prepared for your life as an adult with all of the same advantages that anybody else can possibly have. And I look at freedom when we make all these questions about, well, who's impinging on my freedom and how is this law going to affect me? And frankly, I don't care about basically any adult if we are not giving every single freedom of opportunity to every child on the planet. That's my take on this, and
Absolutely.
until that's the case, there can never be true freedom.
Is that the closing prayer?
All right. Don't turn the Hangouts down just yet. Only Greg. Just mute him. But I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones, go ahead.
I've really been impressed with Jim Gardner. I do appreciate you being in the Hangout tonight.
Thank you
I
very
think that you have spoken to not just our studio audience, but our audience at large.
Our country. He's spoken to our
Well,
country.
I think so. And, you know, what's
all of
happening
them.
here, I think that, you know, so many things are resonating with so many people in the Hangout that I think that this conversation could go on for a long, long time. I wrote something down as you were speaking, Jim. I said most of our politicians are not addressing the human condition, nor are they listening. But we, the people, can change that. And that's what, you know, the cult of honesty is all about. It's about human beings addressing the real issues, trying to raise the bar, trying to get politicians and everyone else to listen to the nonsense that we as human beings have created. With that said, I would like to close out this show with something that I heard just before the show started. Christopher Mowdy was playing a very smooth bass sound. It was wonderful. It was very comforting. And so I'm going to ask you, Christopher, would you close us out with that wonderful, easygoing, comfortable sound? That's nice.
In F sharp, please.
Yeah.
F sharp.
Yeah.
Jim, put some vocals in there. Just talk him through it. Thank you guys for being here tonight, and we enjoyed you so much.
You know, Christopher Mowdy is the basest theist that I've ever met in my life. The basest theist. We'll see you next time on The Cult of Honesty.
Thanks, guys. Good stuff.
Yeah. Good to have you.
We love you, Jim.